And at this moment, let us hear from our next speaker. She will give us in-depth knowledge and understanding on globalization and global citizenship education. She is an adjunct professor at the Department of Educational Policy Studies, University of Alberta. She has been a teacher and a principal in Philippine schools and formerly executive secretary of the Catholic Educational Association of the Philippines. Her fields of tertiary teaching, research, and advocacy includes peace education, values education, multicultural education, curriculum development, and social studies context. Their participants, a virtual applause to Professor Virginia Cawagas.
My task is to talk about globalization and global citizenship, and what makes a global citizen, which is further dissected into three main discussion points. The role of GCED in the vision of education for 2030, what is global citizenship education, and what are the challenges of global citizenship education. And the sources of my reflection today are the collaborative teaching experiences and research work we had with many peace educators and global citizenship educators, and various GCED reports as summarized in this slide. Let's first talk about Education 2030 towards inclusive and equitable quality education and lifelong learning for all. This new vision, fully captured by the proposed SDG 4 to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all, and its corresponding targets. It is the most important commitment to education in recent decades, and which has helped drive significant progress in education. Education 2030 also reaffirms the vision and political will reflected in international and regional human rights treaties that stipulate the right to education and its interrelation with other human rights. Now, we need to recognize the vital role of various fields of transformative education in fulfilling the vision of transforming lives through education. The concept is not totally new. It is the most recent field of transformative education, and it is interrelated with previous fields. GCED reinforces the interconnections and complementarities among various fields of transformative education, as you have seen in the two earlier slides. The GCED movement was catalyzed by the Global Education First initiative, launched in September of 2012 by then UN Secretary Ban Ki-moon, to accelerate the progress towards the Education for All goals and the education-related Millennium Development Goals, and GFI has three priorities: to put every child in school, improve the quality of learning, and foster global citizenship. But we ask, don't we already have citizenship education? Why do we need global citizenship education? First, let's review citizenship education, which is usually defined as educating children from early childhood to become clear thinking and enlightened citizens who participate in decisions concerning society. And here, society is understood in a special sense of a nation with a circumscribed territory which is recognized as a state. The citizenship education further means educating individuals to understand their rights and to be responsible, respectful, and active citizens committed to justice in a democracy. But there are limitations of citizenship education or civics education. For example, it can promote insular nationalism or manipulated into ultranationalism, which is exemplified by citizens who are willing to die for their country, right or wrong. It can also be used by rulers or leaders to promote uncritical, obedient citizens. And here we have too many examples, both in the past as well as in modern days, of even in so-called countries, democratic countries, of how rulers can lead and blind and threaten citizens to be obedient. And of course, it can diminish democratic freedoms and dissent, especially when blind nationalism is taught in civics education. But citizenship based primarily on national identity and expectations is insufficient in today's changing international and globalized order. Nations are now part of the global community. They're bound together in complex interrelationships. There is increasing interdependence and interconnectedness. And there's exponential movement of peoples worldwide. For example, migration, international education, economic and cultural exchanges, tourism, overseas employment, and so on. Many people also develop cross-national and multiple identities. And in the global context of increased tension and conflicts and problems, which now require global solutions, for example, climate change, weapons of mass destruction, migration, and pandemics, for example, what we are experiencing now, the COVID-19 pandemic. There is growing interconnectedness that can foster international and intercultural understanding and a certain level of mutual benefits. But it can also lead to distrust, tensions, and conflicts when foreign economic activities can result in conflicts with local citizens or also lead into environmental destruction. So now we have entered the era of globalization where economic, political, social, cultural, and environmental dimensions of lives at all levels, from the very personal to the social and to the community and to the worldwide level, we are now all interconnected, connected in all dimensions. And therefore, it again confirms the limitation of our usual civics education. And Professor Adarlo wrote, quote, "In this era of globalization, when local issues have global implications and global concerns manifest locally, traditional citizenship education aimed toward national unity and consciousness is no longer relevant. Thus, for nation states such as the Philippines, there is a growing need to incorporate a global dimension to citizenship education. So now the United Nations has endorsed global citizenship as an umbrella term for social, political, environmental, and economic actions of globally minded individuals and communities on a worldwide scale. The term can refer to the belief that individuals are members of a multiple, diverse, local, and non-local networks rather than single actors affecting individual societies. Now, before we move on to talk about global citizenship education, who really is a global citizen? We can say a global citizen is one who upholds identity of citizenship beyond borders, or citizenship beyond the nation state, or planetary citizenship. So we are looking at citizens in every part of the world who are concerned not only with building a society that meets and protects their own rights and well-being as citizens of their state or country, but also the rights and well-being of other peoples and citizens wherever they are. And therefore, people can no longer afford to be parochial in their views. They have to expand their horizon. And global citizens are those who are willing to resolve local, national, regional, and global conflicts and problems, and not merely concerned about, as I said earlier, their own parochial problems. Global citizens seek to global solutions to local and global problems. And global citizens they think and act globally and locally, and at the same time, not globally, and that is why we have what we call now local citizens. A global citizen recognizes interdependence and interconnectedness of all peoples and places. A global citizen has a deep sense of belonging to the global community and common humanity, and one who possesses 21st century competencies and skills such as cross-cultural communication, critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, and multiple intelligences. A global citizen strives to build a better world and future based on human rights, democracy, social justice, inclusion, non-discrimination, diversity, and sustainability. And a global citizen examines critically their local or national governments' domestic and foreign policies and strategies that can undermine peace and security, social and economic justice, the fulfillment of human rights, and sustainable development. So we no longer have what you call passive citizens. A global citizen needs to shift from passive citizenship to active citizenship. Now, let us go back briefly to Sustainable Development Goal number 4 and GCED, and where SDG Goal 4 ensures inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. So the GCED has just affirmed as target in SDG and target 4.7, which says by 2030, all learners should acquire knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, defined in a broader meaning to include human rights, gender equality, culture of peace and nonviolence, global citizenship, appreciation of cultural diversity, and culture's contribution to sustainable development. Now, given that GCED has been taken seriously by most countries, a framework suggesting themes and topics was issued by the UNESCO in 2015. These 5 main topics and themes include local, national, global systems, structures, and processes, culture and intercultural relations, environmental protection and sustainability, socioeconomic development and interdependence, and institutions, conflicts, social justice, and human rights. While many countries have adopted the UNESCO framework, several countries launched their own GCED, revising and integrating it in their existing civics education, such as, for example, Sri Lanka and Lebanon. Sri Lanka developed their own framework where they had 12 key themes and concepts, and Lebanon developed their GCED along its humanitarian dimensions. Well, Kenya, Uganda, and Cambodia, they adopted the UNESCO GCED themes and concepts. Now, I know that the DepEd and PNU are currently working on the Philippine framework of GCED. I don't know how far they have gone in this development of the Philippine framework. However, peace educators argue that GCED should be oriented on building peace at all levels of life, and that global citizenship education should be geared toward a culture of peace, and it should seek to develop citizens who have values, attitudes, knowledge, capacities, and skills to actively and responsibly participate in all activities of society. Promote a critical consciousness and understanding by citizens of the root causes of multiple conflicts in life. And also, GCED should empower active citizens to engage in both personal and social action. The framework that we are suggesting is my contribution to this DepEd project, highlighting the role of GCED in the vision of education for 2030. There are 6 specific themes or topics, and let me just go through them very briefly. For the first theme, dismantling the culture of war, many of you may have already been doing this in your subjects, in your curriculum. Here are some of the themes and topics that need to be included. Prevent and resolve armed conflicts and wars, abolish militarization, nuclear and conventional arms, the arms trade, overcome violence in schools, workplaces, and homes, teach conflict resolution and transformation. Here are some of the themes and topics that you can include. On living with justice and compassion, we should need to overcome structural violence, eliminate rural and urban poverty, meeting the basic needs of all peoples, abolish social and economic injustices, transform trade, aid, and globalization into something more equitable. In promoting human rights and responsibilities, we should make sure that the rights of all peoples are fully fulfilled, abolish or remove human rights violations. We should make the states, institutions, organizations, and individuals accountable and acknowledge their responsibilities. And we should foster a human rights culture within the school community. On building cultural respect, reconciliation, and solidarity, we need to overcome discrimination, stereotyping, and racism. We need to establish solidarity with indigenous people's survival, We need to have interfaith dialogue and respect for all religions and for all different faiths, and to foster intercultural understanding and respect. For living with harmony, in harmony with the earth, we need to prevent environmental destruction in the form of pollution, loss of biodiversity, depletion of fisheries, mining, megadams, the rising of sea level. We need to look at climate change seriously. We need to address the root causes of ecological crisis, and we need to challenge the culture of consumerism, where the three R's is no longer enough. We need more R's like refuse, rethink. And the last group is cultivating inner peace. We need to address this lack of inner peace. We need to overcome alienation, the loss of meaning, hopelessness, addictions. We need to overcome hatred and bitterness. We need to challenge affluenza, which is influenza of the rich. How much is enough for everybody? And the UNESCO has articulated 3 core learning domains for implementing GCED. Of course, you're all familiar with the cognitive, socio-emotional, and behavioral capacities. Just one example on the cognitive: learners acquire knowledge and understanding of local, national, and global issues, and interconnectedness and interdependency of different countries and populations. For the socio-emotional, learners experience a sense of belonging to a common humanity, sharing values and responsibilities based on human rights. And on the behavioral, learners act effectively and responsibly at local, national, and global levels for a more peaceful and sustainable future. In the critical pedagogical principles of GCED, we need to limit the prevailing dominant banking system of education as critiqued by Paulo Freire. We need to eliminate hierarchical and over-competitive models of education. The processes of education need to be also consistent with the vision and goals of GCED or other fields of transformative education. We need to apply the principles of holism, dialogue, values formation, and critical empowerment. So now, where do you find GCED in the curriculum? And well, it applies the principles of lifelong learning. All levels and forms of education, from early childhood to the university, in the non-formal, in the formal, TVET, adult, and community. We also need to acknowledge the linkages among formal, non-formal, and informal education. GCED could be a separate subject or a course in the school curriculum, or it could be integrated or infused across all learning areas. And the whole school approach is very important, especially when we need to interconnect with parents, families, communities, civil society organizations, and other institutions outside the educational system. Another issue that we need to consider in GCED is the assessment, where we need to shift from rote learning or the orientation in cognitive knowledge, including examinations and tests like multiple choice, true or false, and so on. We need to move to critical thinking, analysis, and problem solving, even in our assessment. We need to shift from assessing primarily cognitive achievement to a more holistic assessment, rather, of cognitive, socio-emotional, and behavioral transformation. In formative assessment should be based on a variety of participatory, creative, and dialogical pedagogies. And we need to shift from over competitive orientation to collaborative and contextual orientation. We need to review the role of internationally competitive ranking, for example, the PISA. Who does it really benefit? Does it benefit our students? Does it improve them intellectually, emotionally? What is it for? What is the PISA for? Anyway. So now we are faced with challenges in the implementation or integration of GCED. And here are just a few. How do we integrate GCED in a holistic framework? Or how do we include all themes and issues of a culture of peace? How do we enrich existing components and practices of other fields of transformative education? Because we are not introducing GCED in a vacuum. There are already existing opportunities in our curriculum where GCED themes are naturally integrated. Now, how do we distinguish alternative paradigms of GCED, the liberal or neoliberal paradigm, from the critical paradigm of GCED? How do we translate cognitive and socio-emotional domains of learning into behavioral or action domain? How do we teach controversial issues without being threatened? And how do we respond to COVID-19 pandemic in ways that promote a culture of peace, where no one is excluded or discriminated against because of their socioeconomic background? I would like to end with a quotation by Vandana Shiva, and many of you maybe are familiar with her. Vandana Shiva is an Indian scholar, environmental activist, a food sovereignty advocate, an ecofeminist, and anti-globalization author. She's named by Forbes magazine as one of the 7 most powerful women on the globe. She's a physicist, feminist, environmentalist. Quote, being a planetary citizen does not need space travel. We don't need to be like Jeff Bezos, who can travel in space. It means being conscious that we are part of the universe and of the earth. The most fundamental law is to recognize that we share the planet with other beings and that we have a duty to care for our common home. Maraming salamat po.